Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She tried to leave town. He said, "Not without my heart." You ever loved someone who tried to run from the very place their heart belonged, out here in the West? People don't leave because they want to. They leave because they're hurting. Dustfall, Arizona, 1887. The sun was sinking low, painting the dying town in wildfire gold, when Clara Westwood climbed onto the last train out, ready to disappear, ready to stop believing in anyone. But she didn't know one thing. A cowboy was chasing the platform behind her, a man who had lost too much, spoken too little, and loved her more than he ever admitted. His name was Colt Mercer, and when he reached her, breathless and covered in trail dust, he didn't beg her to stay. He whispered something far more dangerous, something no woman in the West forgets. "Go if you must, but you won't take my heart with you." And in that moment, the whole town held its breath, because sometimes a cowboy's truth can stop a moving train. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Dustfall. Arizona was sinking into a weary orange glow as the last light of day fell like red dust over the old train station. Desert wind swept along the tracks, carrying the scent of metal, old wood, and the quiet ache of lives wanting to leave but never finding the courage. From far away, a train whistle echoed long, low, like the final breath of a place that had witnessed too many goodbyes. Clara Westwood stood beside her worn-out suitcase, gripping the handle so tightly her knuckles turned white, her brown hair tangled in the wind, and her cheeks were wet not from rain, but from everything she had tried to hold in. At 27, she was no longer the hopeful teacher with bright eyes. Dustfall had taken her father, taken her school, and taken the last fragile pieces of faith she once held. She stepped onto the train's metal stair. One step, then another. Her hand trembled, as if her heart was trying to hold on to something she couldn't name. Tears slipped down, but Clara didn't wipe them away. In Dustfall, some sorrows were meant to fall freely, because wiping them never made them lighter. As she placed one foot onto the train's floor, she heard footsteps behind her, dry, steady, and slow, each one carrying the weight of a decision long in the making. Colt Mercer appeared, coated in the dust of miles traveled, his coat brushed with red sand, his boots layered in dirt. His sun-worn face and deep, shadowed eyes looked like they belonged to a man who buried more memories than he ever spoke of. His calloused hand rested on the edge of the train, not to hold her back, just to say he was there. His voice was rough, low, carrying the fatigue of someone who had walked through more mistakes than he dared confess. But his words were sharp, clear, cutting through the cold air like a blade. "Clara, you can leave Dustfall, but you can't take my heart with you." Clara froze, as if time itself had wrapped around her. Her breath caught halfway in her chest. His words simple, quiet, but deep, struck the very place where she had hidden her loneliness for years. She had run from rumors, from pain, from memory, but she had never run from someone who truly saw her. The wind rose, swirling red dust around them. The train whistle called again, closer now, urging her toward her final decision. She stood on the train step, one foot in the life she was ready to flee to, one foot in the land she believed had nothing left for her. Colt didn't move, didn't reach for her, but his eyes, full of a belief in second chances, were enough to make her knees weaken. Second chances. Something Clara Westwood had never allowed herself. The train shuddered. Metal wheels groaned, cutting through the tracks with a cold, merciless sound like a blade slicing through her fragile resolve. Colt kept his gaze on her. No begging, no pressure. Just a man who had lost too much, finally admitting the one thing he feared losing most, her. And in that moment, Clara had to choose. To leave Dustfall and forget, or stay, face everything she feared, and maybe just once be loved the way she deserved. The train was ready to leave. It wouldn't wait for anyone, not even for a trembling heart. Part 1. Clara wants to run away. Dustfall sank into the deep red glow of late afternoon, a heavy, tired light settling over a town far too familiar with loss. Long stretches of dirt roads faded into the horizon, red dust clinging to every crooked porch. The saloon at the end of the street swayed in the wind, its wooden door creaking like the quiet lament of a place that had never truly known joy. From the distant mountains came the sound of wind, long, hollow, cold like the call of loneliness Clara had carried in her heart for years. In the small room behind the old schoolhouse, Clara Westwood gathered the last of her belongings. Her teaching scarf, a few children's books, their covers faded, a chipped wooden frame. All of it went into an old suitcase her mother once used when she was young. Each item placed inside, not just by her hands, but by the weight of a sorrow tightening around her chest. Dustfall had taken too much from her. It took her father, who never came back from the Northern Trail before she could say goodbye. It took her classroom, her only source of pride when the town ran out of money and shut it down. And it took her good name, when cruel rumors spread through the saloon, claiming she was the bad omen behind the school's closure and her father's death. Clara fastened the suitcase shut, her fingers trembling. Not from fear, but because she was truly stepping out of the life she had known. A life filled with pain. Yes, but still the only place she had ever called home. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, Clara walked to the small cemetery on the south side of town. Her father's headstone was worn, covered in moss and dust. She knelt, placing her palm on the cold stone surface that felt like the touch of night itself. "I have no reason left to stay." Her voice cracked, caught in her throat. "I'm tired. Dad, Dustfall has nothing for me anymore." The wind pushed through the cacti, howling as if in protest. But Clara had made up her mind. She rose to her feet, brushed the dust from her dress, and turned to leave. And that was when she saw him. Colt Mercer stood several paces away, half his body cloaked in the shadows of dusk, half caught in the blood-red light of the setting sun. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stood there, dark eyes fixed on her, as if trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. It wasn't a sharp look, not intense, just deep, so deep it unsettled her, as if inside this man, whose life was marked by mistakes, lived a heart that hadn't dared to open in years, except, perhaps, for her. Clara froze. For the first time, her certainty about leaving Dustfall wavered. Colt was never a man of many words, but standing there, in silence, he made her feel something she had long forgotten, that she was not entirely alone in this world. The wind rose, red dust swirling. Clara quickly turned away, afraid that if she looked at him for even a few more seconds, she would never find the strength to walk out of Dustfall. But her heart had already stumbled one hesitant beat, the first crack in her resolve, and she knew that this kind of hesitation was far more dangerous than any rumor Dustfall had ever whispered about her. Part 2. Colt Mercer, the man who longs to make things right. Evening settled over Colt Mercer's old ranch in Dustfall with the pale gold light of the west, stretching across weathered fences and fields scorched by the long, dry season. The wind carried the scent of dry earth, old hay, and the distant chirping of birds returning to their nests. Colt's horse barn sat at the edge of the ranch, a wooden structure worn down by time. The planks groaned softly whenever the wind slipped through. Far off, the rhythmic tap of hooves echoed against the ground, like the slow heartbeat of a place left alive only by habit. Colt stepped into the barn wearing a faded shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong arms marked with old scars. Sunlight cut through the wooden slats, stretching across his face, a face often called handsome in a worn, desert-beaten way. He wasn't the kind of man people approached easily, and most folks in Dustfall preferred not to. Colt's past, though rarely spoken aloud, cast a long shadow that followed him everywhere he went. Inside the barn, his brown horse, Jasper, breathed heavily, its front leg trembling. Colt knelt, pulled over a wooden crate, and reached for bandages, alcohol, and a small knife. He placed a steady hand on Jasper's neck, easing the horse before tending to the wound. "Easy now, and boy." His voice was rough, low like stone dragged across the ground, but there was a gentleness in it no one expected from a man like him. He cleaned the wound, a long gash caused by a loose wire someone had left in the field. Each touch made Jasper flinch, breath hitching in pain. Colt leaned lower, his eyes softening. A few strands of hair fell over his forehead as he patted the horse's mane. "Yeah, I know," he murmured. "Everyone hurts." His calloused hand rested on Jasper's head with a surprising tenderness. Then he whispered a line only the wind could hear: "Everyone hurts. But you still gotta stand back up." That line wasn't for the horse. It was for Colt himself. He knew he carried a ledger full of mistakes. In his youth, he'd fallen in with a gang, traded freedom for quick money, and made choices he'd never admit to anyone. And ever since the day he walked away from that life, Colt had lived like a man paying off an endless debt. Fixing fences for the elderly, repairing roofs for widows, burying dead horses for children who cried too hard to do it themselves. No one ever asked when he showed up, only that the job was done by morning. Only one person seemed to see him clearer than others: Clara Westwood. He never said it aloud, but every time Clara walked past the ranch with her long dress frayed at the hem and an armful of worn books, Colt always looked up. Just for a second. Just one glance. Enough to carry with him the rest of the day. She was the kind of light that didn't make him flinch. He always kept his distance, because a man like him wasn't worthy, or so he believed. When he finished bandaging Jasper's leg, Colt stood, his hands dusty, his expression distant. He gave the horse a firm pat before walking toward the barn door. The sky was turning a deep violet. Night was settling fast. He was just closing the gate when hoofbeats echoed from the hills fast, urgent. A young boy galloped toward him on a small horse. When he reached the barn, he jumped off, panting hard. "Mr. Mercer, did you hear Miss Westwood? She's leaving Dustfall. She's already at the station." Colt didn't move, not even a breath. It was as if the wind stopped. The earth stopped. Every sound fell silent. The boy swallowed and continued. "They say she's taking the last train. Folks say she's not coming back. Still." Colt said nothing, not a word. But his eyes changed the color, shifting into something wounded, something raw. The look of a man hit square in the one place he had no armor. The boy hesitated. "Sir," "Are you okay?" Colt closed his eyes for a single moment, then opened them with a focus Dustfall had never seen from him. He stepped forward, grabbed the reins of his black horse. Jasper let out a distressed sound, as if begging him not to go. Colt turned back, eyes lingering on the injured animal, eyes full of unsaid things. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll be back." But even he wasn't sure he believed it. Because Colt understood something without needing to be told. If Clara left town, he would lose the last chance he had in this life to do something right. Not right for Dustfall, not right for the past, but right for his own heart, the heart he had buried so deep he thought it had stopped beating. Colt swung onto his horse, pressed his heels into its sides, and the animal bolted forward like an arrow through the oncoming dark. The wind clawed at his face. Red dust exploded behind him. But the only image clearer than the night was Clara Westwood standing alone at the train station, with her old suitcase, and those heartbreakingly sad eyes. If he didn't make it in time, she would disappear from his life like lightning fading after a storm. And for the first time in many years, Colt Mercer, a man who feared nothing except himself, felt terrified of losing someone. Truly terrified. He pushed the horse faster. Night had not fully fallen, but Colt knew one thing for certain. Time was running out. Part 3. The letter Clara left behind. Clara Westwood's small room sat behind the old row of wooden buildings, where her classroom used to be before it was shut down. When Colt Mercer pushed the door open, the flickering candlelight fell across bare walls and a neatly closed suitcase sitting in the center of the room. The faint smell of old paper, chalk dust, and Clara's lingering warmth still hung in the air, making the space feel alive, yet hollow, as if a piece of its heart had been taken away. Colt hadn't meant to come inside. He only wanted to make sure Clara hadn't left yet. But the empty room, the cleared desk, and the pen she always used to grade assignments placed perfectly at the corner, like the final punctuation mark of her life in Dustfall, told him everything. He looked around, chest rising and falling a little too heavily. Most of the sunset had already faded outside. Only the trembling candle flame lit the room, unsteady and weak, like a last breath. Then Colt saw it, a folded sheet of paper held down by a small stone. Clara always used to keep her papers from blowing away in the wind. The name on it was written in soft, slanted handwriting to Mrs. Mercer. Colt froze. Mrs. Mercer. His mother. Clara often visited her, bringing bread, dried flowers, reading books to her during cold afternoons. Colt knew, but he never asked. Clara and his mother shared a quiet kind of understanding, something even he couldn't step into. He walked over and lifted the letter, though his fingers were far less steady than the rest of him appeared. The paper was light as a feather, but to Colt, it felt heavier than a stone crushing his chest. He opened it. The candle wavered, casting shadows over each line of handwriting. Dear Ma'am, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. I wanted to say goodbye in person, but I feared I wouldn't have the courage. Thank you for the peaceful afternoons, for the times you held my hand when I felt like I no longer belonged anywhere. Dustfall has cast many shadows over me, but you were one of the rare lights. I'm leaving not because there was no kindness left, but because I am afraid I bring trouble to people who deserve better. Someone like Colt deserves someone better than me. Colt stood completely still. The room collapsed into a small, suffocating space just big enough to hold his heart, now pounding like it was ready to break through his ribs. He read the final line again, And again. And again. The words sliced him open in the quietest way. Someone like Colt deserves someone better than me. Colt's hand tightened around the letter, knuckles turning white. A heavy breath tore from his chest, a rough, broken sound, like an injured animal trying to hide its pain. He stepped back, leaning against the wall. Not because he was weak, but because the emotion flooding through him was too sharp, too real. She thought he deserved someone better. She didn't know not even close that in his eyes. She was the only good thing life had ever given a man full of mistakes like him. Colt rarely showed emotion. But now, his eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and for a tiny moment, just a flicker, he looked like a man who had just lost the most precious thing he never dared to name. He folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, as if touching Clara herself. Then he slipped it into his inner pocket, right against his heart. Outside, the wind picked up. The window slammed against the wall with a sharp noise. Colt jolted not from the sound, but from the realization crashing down on him. If he didn't go to the station right now, she would be gone. Gone for real. No more letters. No more soft laughter. No more quiet hope she left in him every time she walked by. Nothing. Colt pulled his hat on, fastening the strap with a hand that trembled just slightly. He stood there in Clara's empty room like a man who understood far too late that some things, if not held on to, would be taken by time forever. Then he turned, stepping quickly out the door, leaving the flickering candle behind a small, fragile flame, like the soul of a message left unsaid. For the first time in his life, Colt Mercer was no longer afraid of his past. He feared only one thing: losing the best thing he had ever been given, before he could tell her he needed her. Part 4. The Encounter at the Chapel. Dustfall's wooden chapel sat on the eastern edge of town, where the late afternoon sunlight always slipped through the dusty stained glass windows, casting long golden ribbons across the old pews. The wooden door groaned each time the wind pushed against it, carrying with it the faint scent of incense left from the few services ever held there. Inside, everything was so quiet you could almost hear dust settling on the floor. Clara stood at the front pew, hands clasped tightly together, eyes lifted toward the worn wooden cross on the wall. She hadn't come to pray. She simply needed a place silent enough to let the weight in her chest loosen just a little. The sunlight touched her brown hair, forming a thin halo around her head. But her face held no radiance. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling, her breath quick and shallow, as if she were fighting not to fall apart. The chapel door opened, heavy. Familiar footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Colt Mercer stepped inside. He didn't speak, not in the first few seconds. He only stood there, letting the light fall across his face, where a faint streak of red dust still clung from his hard ride to get here. Clara turned, and her heart stumbled at the sight of him. Colt, why are you? He cut her off, not harshly, not urgently, just one line, low and sharp as a blade sliding straight into the truth she'd been running from. Are you leaving because you're hurt? Or because you're afraid of needing someone? The small chapel froze. Clara went still. Colt's gaze locked onto hers, not angry, not demanding, just painfully direct. The kind of honesty that shattered every wall she'd spent years building. She drew in a shaky breath, but her throat felt tight. Her shoulders trembled. And finally, everything she'd held together for far too long slipped out of her control. Clara broke down. Not the soft, fragile kind of crying, but the kind that comes from someone who has endured too much for too long. In silence, "I'm scared," she choked out, one hand gripping her chest as if trying to keep her heart from splitting open. "I'm scared of failing again, scared of disappointing someone again." Her words shattered like glass hitting the chapel floor. She was scared people would talk, scared she wasn't enough, scared she'd bring pain into the lives of those who cared, scared of herself, scared of loving, scared of being loved. Colt took a step forward, slow, steady, intentional, close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not close enough to overwhelm her. He raised a hand, hesitated just a second, then rested it gently on her shoulder. His hand was heavy, warm, and so steady she almost collapsed into him. But it wasn't his touch that undid her. It was what he said next. Soft but solid as bedrock. "You have never disappointed me." Just that. Nothing more. No explanations. No reminders of the past. No demands. The words hit the deepest fear Clara carried, the fear that she was a burden, a problem, a disappointment waiting to happen. And when Colt said she'd never disappointed him, her world simply stopped. Tears spilled over again, forcing her to turn away. But Colt didn't let her hide. He gently turned her back toward him, his eyes steady, warm, impossible to escape. "Clara," he murmured, voice rough around the edges, "look at me." She lifted her gaze, eyes trembling. "I don't care how many scars you carry," Colt said quietly. "I'm not afraid of your past. I'm only afraid of one thing." His voice dropped into something nearly like a confession, that you'll disappear from my life before you ever know how much you matter. The small chapel suddenly felt too small for the emotions swelling between them. No more wind, no more creaking wood, no more flickering candlelight. Just two people, one running, one trying to make things right, standing face to face with the truths they had never dared to speak. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if Colt's words had unlocked a door she had kept sealed for years. Her fear began to loosen, slipping away just enough for something else to enter: hope. Small, fragile, but real, and in dustfall. Hope was rarer than rain. Part 5. Old rumors return. Dustfall's only saloon was drowning in the thick darkness cast by oil lamps running low. Cigarette smoke hung beneath the ceiling like a heavy, ghostly cloud. Drunken men lounged around battered wooden tables, boots propped on chairs, rough laughter mixing with the sharp smell of whiskey. The saloon door creaked open and shut with every gust of wind, groaning like an old beast struggling to breathe. Clara Westwood stood pressed against the counter, hands gripping her cloth bag tight. She'd only stopped by to settle a small debt for Mrs. Mercer. But the air in the saloon made her want to leave immediately. She didn't get the chance. Because the whispers started soft at first, then spreading like a cold draft slipping through her bones. Whispers, poisonous, familiar. Well, look who it is. Little Westwood. Heard she's leaving town. About damn time. Honestly, could have gone sooner. Dustfall's been nothing but trouble since her family went down. That's right. The girls. Bad luck. Each word sliced into wounds Clara thought had healed. But the pain hadn't gone anywhere. It had only been sleeping. Her shoulders tightened. A tremor ran through her arms. Bad luck. They'd said that about her mother, about her father. and now about her as if her family's tragedies were something to mock over a bottle of whiskey. A man leaning against the counter exhaled a wave of alcohol and said loudly enough for her to hear, her daddy dying was no surprise. A man like him raising a decent daughter, hard to believe. Clara's heart clenched hard. She turned, desperate to leave before her tears betrayed her. But another voice cut through a sneering, drunken laugh. Heard she's the reason the school shut down. Girl brings trouble everywhere she goes. Laughter erupted. Clara didn't look back, but tears stung her eyes. Their words dragged her into the darkest days, the day her father died. The day Dustfall whispered she was the curse behind everything. The day she forced herself to smile while drowning in people's pity and suspicion. Then a sound broke the room. The saloon door slammed open. Wind swept in, scattering the smoke. At first, no one noticed. Not until Colt Mercer stepped inside. He stood framed in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor. His eyes were sharp, calm, but held something beneath the surface that made the room stiffen instantly. Dust clung to his coat. His hat was tilted low, and the holster at his hip remained untouched. He didn't need to draw it. His presence alone made several men swallow hard. Clara turned. Their eyes met. She quickly looked down, as if ashamed he had seen her in a moment of hurt. One drunk snorted, raising his voice. Well, Colt Mercer, protector of the town's bad luck girl." Several men laughed. Colt walked forward. Not fast. Not threatening. Just steady each step, heavy enough to silence another voice. He stopped in the middle of the room, resting one hand on the counter. He didn't look at Clara. He didn't look at the men who mocked her. He simply scanned the room with a level, cold calm. Then his voice rolled out over the saloon low, firm and sharp as forged steel. "Whoever disrespects her, disrespects me. No laughter, no chatter, not even a breath." Dustfall's saloon froze in absolute silence. Clara lifted her head, eyes wide and wet. Her heart stopped for a beat. No one had ever stood up for her like that, certainly not with the fierce, unshakable certainty Colt carried in that single sentence. A man opened his mouth to object, but Colt turned his gaze toward him. Not angry, not threatening, just the eyes of a man who would do anything to protect someone who mattered. The man shut his mouth and stared into his drink. The saloon keeper cleared his throat, trying to lighten the oppressive tension, but no one dared speak. Colt finally turned to Clara, his voice so soft only she could hear it. "Let's go home." Clara couldn't speak. She couldn't. Because in that moment, she felt something she had denied for years. She was not alone, and with a single sentence, Colt Mercer shattered the cruel rumors Dustfall had clung to for so long and opened the door to something between them neither had yet dared to name. Not love, not yet, but a promise. And in Dustfall, a promise like that was stronger than any gunshot. Part 6. Clara faces the past. Clara's father's old house sat on the northern edge of Dustfall, half hidden behind scrubby trees and sun-bleached planks beaten gray by desert winds. That little house had once been full of laughter where Clara grew up, where her father sat on the porch sharpening his knife or fixing an old pair of boots, where they ate supper beneath the warm glow of an oil lamp. But today, as Clara stood before the weathered door, the place was nothing but the ghost of a memory, heavy, cracked, and painfully silent. She hesitated for a long moment before pushing the door open. Colt stood one step behind her, not touching, not urging, simply present, like a solid wall between her and the memories waiting inside. The wooden door groaned as it swung open. echoing through the empty house. Dust swirled through the late afternoon light streaming in from a broken window. The air smelled of old wood and time long gone. Clara stepped inside, each step landing on pieces of her own past. The alphabet chart she'd practiced on as a child still clung to the wall, half of it peeled away. Her father's wooden chair sat untouched in the corner, leaning slightly to one side, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Clara reached out to touch it, then pulled her hand back quickly, as though one touch might break her completely. Colt was behind her, silent, still, accepting her pain without trying to fix it. "I always thought," Clara began, her voice so soft it nearly vanished into the room. "If I hadn't asked my father to get that book for me that day, he wouldn't have taken that road. He wouldn't have met those bandits. He wouldn't have." Her voice broke. Her breath trembled. She turned toward Colt, eyes carrying years of sorrow. "I didn't save him. This wasn't a confession. It was the deepest wound she carried, the one Dustfall's cruel rumors had torn wider and wider." Colt took a single step forward, still keeping enough space that she wouldn't feel cornered. His gaze softened, as though he were looking not at the woman she had become, but at the child who had once lost everything. "Clara," he said, voice deep and steady as bedrock. She didn't lift her head. He waited a heartbeat, and then he spoke the one truth she had spent years avoiding. "It wasn't your fault." Clara startled ever so slightly, as if the words had struck a hidden place inside her. But Colt wasn't finished. "You loved him." He paused, eyes dark and gentle like a night forest. "Too much." The house fell silent, so silent they could hear the wind slipping through the cracks in the door. Clara closed her eyes, trembling like someone hearing something they never dared hope for. For years, she had blamed herself, carrying guilt she could never escape, letting the memory of her father's death shadow every corner of her life. And now, with one sentence, Colt cut through that darkness. "You loved your father," Colt continued, his voice so warm it stirred the dust itself. "When people love, they don't see danger. They only see someone they want close. Your father understood that. Everyone would, except you." Clara opened her eyes, lashes wet. I never thought of it that way. Because you blame yourself first," Colt replied quietly. "Always." A strong gust blew through the window, slamming the front door against the wall. Clara flinched, then instinctively stepped closer to Colt, drawn to his warmth like it was the only steady thing in the crumbling house. He still didn't touch her, but his presence solid, silent. Understanding was the closest thing to shelter she had felt in years. Clara looked back around the room, her eyes still sad but no longer afraid. "I thought my past would bury me forever." Colt tilted his head slightly, his voice low and honest. "The past only buries those who refuse to face it. You walked back in here. That's something only the strong do." Clara's lips softened into a trembling smile, fragile, but real, like the first sunlight after a long storm. Neither of them spoke again. They simply stood there side by side, in the house that held her memories, her grief, and the quiet truth that the past could no longer swallow her whole. Colt never touched her, but she had never felt more held. Part 7. Closet. The heart of a cowboy night fell over Dustfall like a thick, heavy blanket draped across the whole town. The moon, thin as a blade, rested low on the horizon. Inside the Mercer family's old horse barn, a single oil lamp glowed from within a rusted iron cage, casting a trembling golden light. It illuminated only half of Colt's face, the other half lost in darkness. Just like his life, part in the light, part buried in shadow. The horses had settled into their stalls, their steady breaths forming a slow, grounding rhythm. The smell of dry grass, old hay, and warm leather wrapped the space in a quiet stillness. This was Colt's refuge at the end of each day, the place he came to escape the ghosts still hovering around his life. Colt sat on a low wooden stool, head bowed, his hat resting on his knee. His roughened fingers traced the brim as though he were trying to pull the right words from the cracks of time. The barn door creaked open, not loud, just enough for a familiar scent of herbs and wool to slip in. Mrs. Mercer, aged now, but with eyes that still saw straight through, a person stepped inside. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders. She watched her son for a long moment before walking closer. "My boy," she said softly. "It's late. Can't sleep." Colt didn't lift his head. "Can't sleep." She studied the weight in his posture, the way his strong hands trembled just slightly. She knew instantly what troubled him. "It's that girl, Clara. Isn't it?" Colt's grip tightened around the hat brim until his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, voice dropping low, weighted like a stone dragging underwater. "I'm scared she'll leave. This morning, I almost didn't get there in time." Mrs. Mercer pulled up a stool beside him. "You're scared?" she asked gently, a hint of teasing warmth nudging him to finally speak what he always avoided. Colt sat in silence for a long, long moment. The lamp flame danced across his face, revealing the exhaustion carved into him over years of carrying more than he ever admitted. "I'm scared," he finally confessed. "Scared of losing her. Scared I won't say what I need to say in time." He swallowed, the sound thick and painful. "Scared I'll let the best thing I've ever had slip away again." Mrs. Mercer rested her hand over his, the same hand that once guided him through harsh winters and still held the same warmth. "Colt," she said softly, "men of the West don't hold on to anyone." Colt stared at the floor. He knew that. He'd grown up watching men let the wind take everything: their families, their hopes, even themselves. But his mother wasn't finished. Unless... She lifted her head, looking straight into his eyes, dark, deep, holding the whole night sky. Unless that someone makes their heart come alive again. Colt looked up, the lamplight spilling across half his face. And in that instant, he wasn't a lone cowboy anymore. He was a man standing face to face with the truth he'd tried to outrun for years. Clara Westwood wasn't just someone he wanted to protect. She was the reason he'd begun to see himself again beneath the dust, the regret, the mistakes. Mrs. Mercer placed her hand gently over his chest, right where Clara's letter rested inside his coat. "My son," she whispered. "Sometimes the chance to make things right doesn't come from your past, but from the person who makes you want to become something better." Colt closed his eyes for a moment, an acknowledgement, a surrender to a truth he'd long avoided. Clara wasn't just important. She was his only chance to do something right, to love in a way he had never dared to love before. Mrs. Mercer stood, adjusting her shawl. "Get some rest," she said softly. Tomorrow morning will be cold. And she looked toward the barn door, her voice firm as sharpened steel. You'll need your strength for the train station. Colt rose the moment he heard those words. No hesitation, no second guessing. He grabbed his hat and set it on his head. A bit of dust fell from the brim. His eyes, usually shadowed now, carried something different: strength, resolve, and a spark that looked very much like hope. I'm going, Colt said. Before it's too late. Mrs. Mercer smiled a gentle, knowing smile, as though she understood something Colt had barely begun to grasp, that a cowboy's heart only beats strong again when it finally finds the right person to beat for. Colt pushed open the barn door. Cold night wind swept in, sharp but clean, swirling around his boots and carrying his newfound resolve into the darkness. He fixed his gaze toward the distant railway station where the morning light would rise, and where, for the first time in years, his heart knew exactly where it needed to be. Part 8. The train station before dawn. Dawn had not yet risen, but cold mist had already draped Dustfall Station like a thin silver veil. Beads of moisture clung to the rails, shimmering beneath the weak glow of the old hanging lantern. The air was sharp enough to sting the skin, each breath turning into pale clouds that vanished into the darkness. Clara Westwood stood alone on the platform, her suitcase beside her, fingers interlaced inside the sleeves of her thin coat. She lifted her gaze toward the distant mountains, where the sky was shifting from black to a faint violet blue. The low hum of an approaching train rolled across the valley, deep, drawn out, a reminder that her time in Dustfall was truly ending. She had tried to find peace by leaving. She had convinced herself that distance was the answer. But her heart had trembled all night, restless, as if it already knew the truth her mind was refusing to face. A sudden gust swept across the platform, tossing Clara's hair aside. She lowered her head, steadying herself. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Fast. Uneven. Urgent. Almost desperate. Clara turned, and her heart skipped. Colt Mercer emerged from the fog, coated in dust, his jacket stained red with desert soil, breath heaving like he'd crossed the entire town in one impossible ride. His horse snorted clouds of steam into the cold air, hooves carving grooves into the frozen ground. Colt nearly leapt off before it had fully stopped. He ran toward her, each step pounding against the damp earth, cutting through the mist as though he were fighting the darkness itself to reach her. Clara. His voice was rough from the cold, from fear. She held her composure only on the outside. Her eyes betrayed her. Colt, what are you doing here? He stopped in front of her, bending with his hands on his knees as he fought for breath. Sweat and desert dust streaked down his face, but his eyes, those dark, shadowed eyes, never left hers. He stood upright and stepped closer, not grabbing, not pleading, just close enough that his breath mingled with the mist between them. Clara, he said, voice low, nearly swallowed by the wind. I have to say this. Before you go. Her throat tightened, a knot rising inside her as the cold wind whirled around them, pushing the mist into ribbons of silver. Then Colt said the words that stopped the world. If you leave, I won't have a heart left to put anywhere. Simple words, but the largest confession a man like Colt Mercer could ever make. Clara stepped back half a pace, not from fear, but because the force of his honesty made her knees weaken. Tears welled instantly, blurring his face. She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. Colt, you shouldn't say that. He looked at her as though looking deep enough might let him hold on to her soul. I can't not say it. Not this time. Clara broke down, her cry soft but cracking like old wood splitting in the cold dawn. She had wished, for so many years, that someone would say these words to her. But now that they were real, they terrified her more than anything. I can't stay, she whispered. There's nothing for me in Dustfall but pain. Colt's hands tightened into fists, yet he didn't touch her. You have me. Those 3 words nearly brought her to her knees. But her heart too used to running beat wildly, erratically, like it didn't trust itself. She bent to pick up her suitcase, tears still falling. I have to go. Colt, she said through trembling breaths. If I stay, I'll disappoint someone again. A train whistle echoed low, long, shivering through the dawn mist. Clara turned away, each step tearing something inside her. Colt didn't stop her, didn't reach for her, didn't run after her. He simply stood there, watching the only woman he had ever wanted to keep climb the steps of the train. Clara paused at the doorway, tears streaking down her cheeks. She looked at Colt one last time, her gaze full of longing, fear, and a desperate wish to believe in something she wasn't sure she deserved. She turned and stepped inside. Pain tore through Colt's chest, but he didn't make a sound. No one ever hears the sound of a cowboy's heart breaking on the mist-covered platform. His silhouette stood frozen, a lone figure carved from shadow and silence. Clara cried, but she still boarded the train. Because sometimes, a heart doesn't run from other people. It runs from itself. Part 9. The moment of decision. The engine rumbled from deep within the train, a slow vibration crawling along the rails like the heartbeat of a steel beast waking from sleep. The wheels scraped against the tracks with a sharp, heavy sound, dragging the weight of impending farewell through the biting cold of early morning. Clara stood at the doorway of the carriage, both hands gripping the icy metal railing. She didn't look inside the train, she didn't dare. Her eyes were fixed on Colt Mercer, standing alone on the mist-covered platform, bathed in the first fragile light of dawn. Wind tugged at her coat, whipped at her hair damp with tears. The world seemed to slow until there was nothing left but the roar of the train and the frantic thudding of her heart trying to break free. The train began to move, slowly, then faster. Clara's fingers tightened around the railing, her throat closing as if invisible hands were squeezing it shut. Colt didn't move. He didn't chase her, didn't reach for her, didn't call her name. He simply stood there tall, silent, and shadowed like dustfall itself before the morning fully broke. Clara waited. For what? She didn't know. For him to step forward to beg her to stay. To be like the cowboys in every old tale pulling the woman he cared for back into his arms. But Colt didn't do any of that. He only gave a small nod so slight she would have missed it if she weren't looking straight at him. A single nod, yet heavy with the words he didn't speak. If you truly want your freedom, I won't stand in your way. He didn't say it out loud, but she felt it as clearly as wind whistling through canyon walls. And that quiet release, that strength wrapped in gentleness struck Clara's heart harder than any plea could have. Tears streamed down her face. No time to wipe them. No place to hide them. She had thought she wanted freedom. She had thought leaving Dustfall would save her. She had thought walking away would make life lighter. But when Colt stayed still and let her go, that was the moment she heard her heart shatter with absolute clarity. She didn't want to leave him, not even one step. The train gathered speed. She had to choose now, this instant, or the chance would never come again. Her breath hitched. She clung to the railing, her whole body trembling. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, as if her heart finally spoke louder than her fear, Clara jumped. She leapt from the moving train. Her feet hit the ground hard, stumbling, nearly collapsing onto the cold, mist-soaked earth. Her suitcase flew from her hand, rolling to the far edge of the platform. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, tears mixing with the morning's silver fog. The train thundered on, leaving her behind a reminder that this decision belonged to her and her alone, not made from fear, not made from running. But because she chose to stay, and Colt Mercer, who had not taken a single step, had seen everything. When Clara lifted her tear-blurred gaze, she saw him walking toward her. Slow. Steady. Like a man who had known from the beginning that her heart only needed a single nod to turn back. And in that moment, beneath the cold mist and the faint glow of dawn, Clara understood true freedom was never about leaving. True freedom was choosing the one person her heart no longer wanted to run from. Part 10. The heart that stayed. The Dustfall station fell into a strange stillness once the train disappeared beyond the far bend. Only the early wind moved, slipping between the cold steel rails, carrying the last traces of dawn frost. The sky was waking, soft light stretching across the horizon, washing everything in a faint red glow dust. Damp ground, and the two souls standing just a few steps apart, though their hearts had already reached each other long ago. Clara stood between the tracks, her breathing still uneven from jumping off the moving train. Her knees stung from the fall. Her hands trembled faintly. But none of that mattered next to the fierce, liberating thrum of her heartbeat, finally telling the truth she had been running from. Colt Mercer stood a few paces away, his boots dusted with frost, his shoulders rising and falling from the hard ride that had brought him here. He didn't speak, didn't rush to her. He just watched, deep, steady, as if making sure what he'd witnessed moments ago wasn't a miracle imagined by a desperate heart. Clara drew a shaky breath and stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3. Then she was almost running through the thin morning mist, running past the empty space that once terrified her, running toward the one man who gave her the choice instead of pulling her back. When she reached him, her legs nearly gave out. She fell into his arms, like they were the only place all her scattered pieces could ever fit again. Colt wrapped his arms around her instantly, strong, but never crushing. His embrace was wide, warm, and steady enough to make the whole cruel world blur into nothing for a moment. They stood there on the empty tracks while the early wind swept past, carrying the cold bite of metal and the familiar scent of red dust. Clara lifted her face, eyes still wet, voice trembling but sure, I don't know what the future looks like. But if your heart stays here, then I'm staying too. Colt closed his eyes for just a heartbeat, only a second, but she felt the weight fall from him, as though he had finally put down a fear he'd carried for years. He held her closer, just enough for his warmth to seep through her bones, just enough for everything else to fade. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their legs in soft red spirals. Dawn light touched Colt's face, igniting his eyes in a way Dustfall had never seen before. And then, slow, so slow, a smile appeared. Not the half smile he sometimes gave her from afar, not the polite one he wore when fixing a neighbor's fence or patching a roof. This was real. A deep, quiet smile so rare it felt like a resurrection. a silent cowboy smiling like he'd been reborn. Clara stared at him, lips trembling. Colt. He slid a hand to her back, voice low and firm in the way only he could be. You don't have to run anymore. Not from Dustfall, not from your past, not from me. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath strong, honest, meant for her. On the frost-red tracks, beneath a newborn morning, two hearts finally stopped fleeing. They stayed, and for the first time in years, Dustfall witnessed something rarer than rain, a love strong enough to hold together what life had tried to break apart. Later, on the porch of the old wooden house, Clara and Colt stood side by side, quietly watching the sun sink over the endless stretch of prairie. The evening sky spread in ribbons of gold and red, casting their shadows long across the dusty ground. The wind carried the scent of dry grass, worn leather, and the fading ghosts of things long past, giving way to something gentler, something new. Clara leaned lightly against Colt's shoulder. Colt's arm came around her waist. No words. Peace spoke for them. In the West, beauty isn't found in perfection. It's found in the rough, the weathered, the real. In hearts carved by wind and storms, yet still brave enough to open again. In the unforgiving West, people don't look for flawless things. They look for second chances, for a heart brave enough to stay, for an embrace that knows how to heal, for a love strong enough to lead them back to themselves. Colt tightened his hand gently at her waist, reminding her that even if their pasts were full of scars, the future could still be built from tenderness. Clara looked out at the burning red horizon and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because, finally, she was standing exactly where her heart wanted to stay. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance at love, leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. And don't forget to follow the channel for more healing tales from the wild American West. Wild West US, where cold-eyed cowboys love with redemption. Second chances ride in the West. Love that saves a man from himself.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving